Hello, good morning to most, good afternoon to others, and good evening to the viewing audience across the pond. I am your host, Jason Miles, here for another episode of This is Revolution podcast. While we usually don't do shows this early, our guest is located across the pond in the United Kingdom, and I know how much the live audience likes to participate in these streams, so we're doing it live. We still have a show scheduled for tonight at our usual time, 6 p.m. Pacific, with Vivek Chibber, where we'll try to define a bit better for people what the professional managerial class is, what it isn't, and how it functions to serve capital. After the main show this evening, we will be having a movie night watch party. We'll be screening the 2023 character study Magazine Dreams, starring Jonathan Majors. If you want to join us and you dig listener-supported programming like this, then become a patron for as little as $3 a month or $30 for the year. You can make sure TIR can continue this breakneck pace of shows. Now, let's talk about what you guys are here for. Left media in the era of cancellation. The death of Charlie Kirk has been a boon for the right's campaign to suppress free speech across both mainstream and independent liberal left media. Right-wing calls to fire anyone who expresses even a hint of satisfaction at Kirk's murder are being framed as a defense against hate speech. We're reminded once again of the bipartisan propagandist refrain, hate speech isn't free speech. But hate speech is free speech, and trampling on one of the most important pillars of American civil life only pushes us further down the road towards authoritarianism. A filmmaker friend of mine, currently working on a documentary about climate change, told me he's self-censoring narration because words like climate crisis are seen as too divisive. Instead, he's been encouraged to use softer terms like weather resiliency. Does this kind of neutering distort the urgency of the message and blunt the call for immediate climate action? Our guest today is part of a small left publishing house whose charter emphasizes, quote, quality over edgy content and hot takes, putting out considered yet incisive reflections in a timely manner. We aim to support established writers and discover new talent, prioritizing fair royalties, ongoing dialogue, and an emphasis on quality essays and books that promote formal and theoretical innovation as part of a community, unquote. Those are noble goals, but in a media landscape where the algorithm rewards outrage and divisiveness, does left publishing risk becoming the rhetorical yin to the conservative administration's yang, locked in a moral tug of war rather than advancing a socialist or leftist agenda? Are we working to convert people to a broader left project, or are we just trying to own the right? Revol Press refuses to participate in the kayfabe that siphons off our attention. Instead, it seeks to expand our political horizons and nurture a hopeful left project. Our guest today, Bram Gieben, is the author of the first release on Revol Press, Darkest Timeline. If you're watching or listening on the audio only, you'll find a link in the description to Revol Press and, of course, Bram and co-owner Mike Watson's book, Hungry Ghosts in the Machine. We've both had them on to discuss those books. Please welcome, coming all the way live from a secret bunker in the UK, Bram Gieben.
Yeah.
How are you? Can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you. Yep. Froze for a sec there.
Yeah, you got froze for a second. Now, how did you get involved with Revol, and how is your book doing so far?
That's an interesting story. So Mike and I started talking about Revol shortly after I'd had him on my podcast, Strange Exiles. I think Mike reached out to me and said, you know, I'm currently between publishers. What if we started a publishing house? So myself and Mike and one other guy, we were talking about this for a good long while. So it was in gestation for a while. I think I suggested the name Revol, and then for various reasons I had to kind of step back for it. So when it launched, it was Mike flying solo.
It was Mike flying solo.
Yeah. And then Mike worked with me on the edits on my book, which eventually came out 2024. So that was us off to the races. Shortly after that, Mike asked if I'd like to come back aboard as an editor. So that's kind of been my involvement. The book's done really well, man. I mean, it definitely exceeded all my expectations for it. Before I wrote Theory, I was mostly a poet and rapper. So I think like my collection that I self-published of poetry back in 2015, I sold maybe 200-300 copies. So without mentioning numbers, I've definitely smashed that with the first book for Revol. I don't know, maybe I just hit like a particularly resonant topic. I think I've probably got the same fear that all first-time authors have, that the next one's not going to sell as many. But it seems to have resonated with people, and it seems to kind of keep resonating with people. Like I just occasionally get messages or tweets or something saying, "Just discovered your book. I love it. Going to buy 5 copies for my wife for Christmas." So yeah, it seems to be doing well, and I think certainly like the themes are as resonant as they were in 2024. Everything's taken on a very apocalyptic hue, particularly since the start of the Trump presidency, which we're going to start talking about today. And yeah, definitely in the UK as well, things are looking pretty bleak. I wrote a thing for Revol not that long ago called Farther Down the Timeline, where I kind of looked at some of the predictions I'd made and I guess like how accurate they'd been. And I think I stand by a lot of the stuff I said in the book in terms of how it's played out now. So yeah, I'd say it's been a success. I'm working on the next one for Revol as well. We're going to announce that at some point soon. But we also have a ton of books by other people in the pipeline too, which we're very excited about.
Yeah, Ben and I are working on our part
Right.
for the metal compendium. We had to restructure some stuff. Speaking of Donald Trump and actually where you are in the United Kingdom, that's been has it been shocking for you to see? I don't want to say a return. Does it feel like a resurgence of Tommy Robinson with the resurgence of Trump, or was he always there and now there's just more attention around him because of Trump?
Yeah, I guess the connectedness of those things depends on what angle you're viewing it from, right? I mean, Trump's in the UK right now. We know that there's a huge kind of antipathy towards him from most of the general public. That's one of the reasons why they've kind of closed off all of the public events that he was in. They've all happened behind very high walls with lots of security guards. I think, both the protests against him and the people who come out to support him have largely taken place in a kind of, very, very carnivalesque sort of scenario outside the walls of these places. But yeah, in terms of Tommy Robinson, so last weekend saw 150,000 people attend what some are calling the biggest far right demonstration in the UK's history. It's certainly the biggest that I can remember. And I think a lot of people found that quite shocking. I think if you have been paying attention to the currents in British politics and culture for a while, it probably wouldn't have shocked you that much. There has been a rightward drift for a long time. The way that immigration in particular is like weaponized in the British news cycle is crazy. I recently stopped watching ITV in the morning because every single morning on the breakfast TV show, which is, very light and sort of entertainment driven, they would always be talking about these small boats crossings. And, people like to kind of try and contextualize that in terms of, okay, we've got rising numbers of asylum seekers or migrants coming across the channel, and that's increasing strain on public services. These are the arguments they use to sort of dignify these far right arguments. But what you saw at the Tommy Robinson rally was very much more in line with kind of traditional far right tropes. They were saying we want our country back, and I guess despite the fact that maybe a lot of the people there have been kind of, I guess, led into thinking like this through the propaganda in the mainstream media, increasing radicalization online. It's still the fact that it's so antithetical to the type of culture that even Tony Blair, was trying to talk about when he was in power. The focus on multiculturalism, on Britain as a place which is welcoming to refugees, that was the general tone of the conversation for a very long time. Now that's really shifted, and you're seeing the return of these nativist tropes. And there doesn't seem to be much pushback from the mainstream media at all. If anything, it's being kind of embraced in a way that's really disturbing. And of course, you can't discount the fact that, like, at that rally, they had Elon Musk beamed in from the internet. He making predictions about civil war in Britain and that kind of thing. You had a lot of speakers from the MAGA right, and people affiliated with that. So I don't think you can separate the two. I think there's also the case that, like, British culture sort of follows in the footsteps of American culture, maybe 5 years behind. So what we're seeing in terms of that rightward turn now, I think we could have anticipated this by looking back to the first Trump presidency. But when you
the first Trump presidency and Brexit, sorry to interrupt you, kind of happened side by side.
Yeah, and I mean, Brexit was a kind of nativist, reactionary movement as well. I guess it's like it's when you look at things like the protests outside the hotels housing asylum seekers, that's really disturbing stuff. I mean, it recalls the January 6th stuff, the calls to hang Mike Pence. It's like the slow creeping justification of violence or disorder in order to sort of reclaim some sort of nativist, very regressive, almost like false nostalgic vision of what Britain used to be, when in actual fact Britain's been multicultural for most of its history. So all of this is very disturbing, and I think particularly seeing just the number of people at that rally should really give pause to anyone who considers himself left or liberal. There's obviously a need to oppose that, and it's not being taken up by mainstream media or by politicians.
I saw a little bit of it this morning. As I told you, I was up a little earlier. I got my times confused for the show. I think originally we were going to have Mike on, and he's in Finland. It seemed like it was a mixed bag, though, because the clown show is finally in the United Kingdom. Do you think some of those 100,000 estimated people that are at the rally are there for one of two reasons, or three reasons, I guess? One would be they support this kind of Britain first, anti-immigrant, like you said, national nativist stance. Two, maybe they just like the pro wrestling of it all.
Yeah, sometimes
we like our villains.
Yeah.
And are there people that are just there to watch because they are addicted to rage and outrage?
Addicted to rage-a-hole, yeah, as Homer Simpson once said. I mean, I don't think you can discount the kayfabe aspect of it. This is kind of what I like about your series that you did for Means TV, is that you're unpacking that aspect of how people just get drawn to spectacle, and that's actually kind of divorced from politics, and it then gets manipulated for political ends. And I'm sure that there are people, I mean, you definitely, like, the news has been full of people saying, stop calling me far right. I'm not far right. I just care about women. I just care about children.
Yeah.
They've bought, the propaganda about the very, maybe only one incidence where somebody was convicted of a sexual assault against a minor, and they'd been staying in a migrant hotel. But all of this is very divorced from context, right? Like, why do we have the migrant crisis in Britain? It's because we shut down legal routes to immigration. Before we had the small boats crisis, we had people stowing away in lorries and trucks and trains coming across the channel. There's always been an influx of people seeking legal asylum in Britain, but coming in through illegal means. So the failure to address that crisis by providing routes for legal immigration, legal routes to this country, is what's led to the massive influx of people trying to reach us by very, very dangerous means. And I think, like, very few people are willing to look on that as a humanitarian crisis that's driven by so many factors. I mean, for instance, the fallout of the wars in the Middle East, of which we were part of, the collapse of those states and the resulting waves of emigration from those states, economic inequality on a massive scale. which is a problem across the world, and of course climate change as well. I mean, all of these factors are probably likely to increase. So at some point we have to start dealing with it from a humanitarian point of view. But there's very, very little willingness to do that. And I think at least part of that is to do with the fact we had a conservative government who drove a kind of program of austerity for a decade and a half or more. And what this meant was that public institutions, all of our infrastructure, all of these were undermined or not renewed or underinvested in. And so this really put the screws on, particularly working class people. But I think everybody in Britain, you've got the cost of living crisis, you've got failing education system, failing national health system. So all of this kind of creates a perfect storm where people don't feel like they're doing well. They don't feel supported. They don't feel like they have access to services. And as a result, you get this nativist current that emerges that says, well, if we can't access a GP, if we can't send our kid to a school that's able to look after them, why should we be bringing in anybody from anywhere else? But again, it's, just like in America, it's very resistant to facts, this kind of right-wing discourse. The big lie that is spread is that immigrants in hotels are kind of being given free iPads and they're put up in luxury hotels. This is bullshit. I mean, this is just flat out bullshit. Like they're living on something like $20, the equivalent of $20 a week. Yeah. They're not allowed to go and seek employment. The hotels that they're put up in, they often intentionally choose to put those in impoverished communities because that's where the cheapest hotels are. But this is a service that's been outsourced from the British state. So it's, the argument that taxpayers' money is paying for it is absolutely accurate. But that money is going into the pockets of big corporate entities who are then renting out these rooms and actually making a massive profit on it. And it's not like when you house, 100 refugees in an incredibly impoverished area who can't work and can't contribute, in terms of tax, who do need things like GP care. If you do that, then you are simultaneously taking resources from out of that community, putting additional stress on the infrastructure, but you're also lining the pockets of the shareholders of these companies. That's what people should really be angry about. But again, like I say, it's kind of a fact-resistant discourse. It wants to pit us against some invading other, who's taking up our resources, and the real picture is not quite as simple as that. I mean, I guess you could say in Britain, at least we have a public health service. Like what's happening in America, the pressure on the working classes is exacerbated by things like the horrific healthcare system that exists over there. I think there's a real need in Britain to sort of like fight for the things that the state used to do, things like the National Health Service, because there's every chance that the right will use the failure of it as an excuse to wreck it, and that's been a danger in our politics for a long time.
But isn't this the moment though that the right kind of really loves, or the conservatives really love? Like historically, where I'm from, they love these moments where institutions fail. Mm-hmm. And I was reading a quote today that a friend posted on social media about The Wire, about how The Wire kind of exposed the failure, the hollowness of institutions. But what Trump does is something kind of much worse. He just lays bare that hollowness that you're starting to believe, and just really show, hey, everything is about the money. Art, just about the money. Universities, diploma mills, all of your institutions are trash because they're just siphoning off your taxpayer dollars, privatize everything. And as the health service is kind of gutted and overran, you will believe that it's just another government failure because politicians lie. Is this kind of the perfect storm right now to gut your National Health Service?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to draw too many equivalences between the British right and what's happening with Trump, because they do have different histories and they do have different, factors at play. you know, in terms of what would Farage do if he was in charge, like Nigel Farage, the leader of the biggest far right party in the UK. Well, we've had a little taste of that. Like his party Reform actually gained control of quite a lot of local councils. And, for instance, just one example, the first thing that one of these councils did was they said they were going to remove every single DEI position from anybody working for local government. And it turned out that there weren't any. Like there was literally zero people employed in a specified DEI role. So in a way, they kind of try and like ape the rhetoric of Trump, again, for that kind of KFAB reason of it plays well. I think Farage has always been a little bit of a lickspittle and a toady when it comes to trying to cozy up to Trump, but they don't actually have a plan. I mean, in some sense, you could say that's maybe a reason to worry less about them seizing power in some way, is that they would very quickly fuck it up. They're not like the Conservative Party who actually have governed for the majority of the time I've been alive. For in the last 40 years, I think it's probably been no more than a decade of that, which was under a ostensibly left-wing government. But certainly, pulling down the NHS. I mean, I think Farage has made noises about how the NHS is something he wants to maintain, but the fact is, he started off as an investment banker. Like he's one of those bros. Absolutely, if that could be dismantled, further privatized, and there was a profit to be made, I would think his party would do it. I definitely think that the kind of narratives about things like the small boats that they channel are a cover for getting in and asset stripping the country even further. That's the thing, is that you can't really rely on what the right says. For all of the populist kind of posturing that Trump does, what has he done? He's transferred lots of money into the pockets of billionaires and corporations. He's deregulated things. He's given tax breaks to the wealthy. So all of those promises to the white working class that he made on the campaign trail, they have definitely not been fulfilled. What's maybe terrifying is, I mean, take the example of the measles vaccine. I think there was an example in America where a couple, tragically, their child had died because they weren't vaccinated against measles. And that couple were on TV saying that they were still anti-vaccine, So there's a level of like insanity or disconnect happening there, whereby no matter what kind of like wreckage happens in the wake of the far right coming to power, they're still going to clap because the spectacle continues. So that kind of KFAB aspect that you talked about in your series, I think can't be underestimated. People are there for the spectacle, for the buffoonery and the clown show, and facts aren't really going to get in the way of that.
It's team sports, man.
It is.
That's what scares the hell out of me. That was kind of the impetus to do the series, but this is about you, brother. Has the Charlie Kirk shooting and the Trump administration's repression affected any day-to-day operations at Revol or influenced any editorial decisions? I know it's still early, but I'm sure you guys have seen in the States already the Jimmy Kimmel situation where he just made kind of a flippant comment about Charlie Kirk. There's been much worse things said about people that have been killed in these types of late night talk shows, and we haven't seen this. It's already come out that the network was like, we just wanted to do a preemptive strike if Trump was going to do anything to us. I mentioned in the preamble to the show that I actually have a friend that's putting together a documentary about climate change, and even they're a little worried about verbiage to get into certain film festivals and get distribution. Is this affecting your operation at all, or are you guys just so underground it's like F it?
It's an interesting question. I like that in your introduction, weather resilience. That really made me laugh. It's difficult to tell, right? Because you can't quantify what you can't see. Like I had Adam Turrell, who's one of our authors. His book was Gothic Capitalism, and he's an anti-capitalist organizer. He makes anti-capitalist arts. He's a member of the DSA. So he's very out there and in public with the fact that he's a left-wing figure who's anti-Trump and who is protesting this stuff. And I asked him kind of the same question. He said that he wasn't too worried, and I think that's because the advocacy and the activism he does is like on quite a local scale. They live in a a small rural place, which is broadly speaking progressive, and so the forces of the far right seem quite distant. And I think that's to do with like the scale of America, right? Like when you see America in the media from Britain, you think of it as kind of like homogenized in one country, but really it's like a whole bunch of countries that have been smooshed together, and there's lots of different layers of government, and what happens in one state might be very different from what happens in another. Okay, so I don't think Adam is worrying too much about the Stasi turning up at his door. On the other hand, when you see something like what happened to Kimmel, when you see what's been happening with JD Vance calling for people to lose their jobs if they've tweeted something about Kirk, I mean, on the one hand, this is like quite funny because it sort of mirrors the cancel culture stuff that was happening on the left, up to a few years ago, and still is happening in some places. It's been termed like the woke right, and they are like using every single trick in the playbook that was used by left activists to get people cancelled or deplatformed. But when it's in the hands of the right and it's in the hands of the state, I think that is profoundly more disturbing. Obviously, Kimmel is a high-profile target, But in terms of what I said about like you can't quantify what you can't see, I think perhaps people are reluctant to submit, even to a press as small as Revol, if they feel like publishing something in a left-wing or socialist press could draw attention to them. So I do wonder about that. I wonder if there are people out there who would be maybe reluctant to submit to us because of the current climate. And I don't see that getting any better, if that makes sense. But certainly there's nothing where, Mike and I sitting in Finland and the UK with the situation in those countries at the moment, like we would lose nothing from publishing a very forthright socialist book by an American author, but that author might have something to lose. And I can understand that reticence, and it is quite scary. I don't think we've seen this level of crackdown on people for speech, or this crackdown on people in such a kind of ideological way, like in my lifetime. I think it's pretty crazy.
But, never in either of our lifetimes, we're around the same age, have we had a pro wrestling president that really is good at making everything a carnival. And in that, and also there's a lot of ghouls in his cabinet that would love to yell at everybody for speech. Todd McGowan wrote a book, I think last year, about joy and how the right is kind of devoid of a certain joy because they are against everything. And if you listen to any of these right-wing leaders, they're never, and I'm talking about around the globe, they're never campaigning on a certain promise other than the promise of not being left. That's kind of it. It's campaigning on negativity alone. And even this, if someone says something wrong, you have to stop it. In our darkest times in this country, free speech has been something that has been fought for. The ACLU, love them or hate them, the American Civil Liberties Union, has defended Klan members because of the fear of suppression of speech. Do you see, and it's bipartisan in my opinion, the suppression of speech is commonplace for most people. I don't know how much it happens where you live. I feel that it probably happens a lot where people are having an argument, someone's recording it, or maybe one of the people in the argument's recording it. It's uploaded, and depending on what you see from the argument, it goes online, and then someone says, let's make this person famous. Let's get this person fired from their job. Recently, there was a situation at a baseball game in the U.S. where it was in Philadelphia. A Philadelphia player hit a home run. Some people scrambled for it. A gentleman got the ball. He was there with his son, gave the ball to his son, but he did take it from another section. a woman that was sitting in that section ran up on the man. I don't know if you saw this, and like yelled at him for the ball. He didn't want to argue, gave the ball to the woman. And this was all on the big screen was happened to capture this all, so they don't know this. Um, the man gives the ball to the woman, hugs his son. The team saw this. Everybody saw this. The team ended up giving the kid all these things, an autograph bat, balls, everything. So the kid wins. Dad wins. Dad's dad of the year. The lady got her ball. Kind of everybody, whatever you wanted, you won. But in this woman wanting this ball, that did land in her section, there was a call to get this woman fired. Let's find out who she is. Let's make her life hell. She's the Phillies Karen because it's the Philadelphia Phillies. We see these things all the time where interpersonal conflicts can cost someone their job, even when they're not representing their company. When these things happen, is the war on free speech something that we are a part of and we don't want to admit?
There's a lot of parts to this, I think. I mean, first of all, that kind of like being convicted in the court of public opinion, that's been turbocharged by social media. And I think the algorithms have something to do with that. Like content that, causes discussion because it's controversial is amplified by the algorithm. And so we've all kind of got sucked into that, right? Yeah. And I think, that was the trap that maybe the left fell into, is that emboldened by having reach on social media, by having profile, they kind of got sucked into this cancel culture stuff. But, whatever the left sets up in terms of like the power to cancel was always going to be weaponized against them when the right inevitably got back in. You could say the same of like the surveillance that became such a huge part of British culture under the Blair government. They massively increased the use of CCTV cameras and things like that. That was something that was always dangerous. It was always going to be weaponized by a far right, or by even a soft right government that came in. So I think that you have to be cautious if you're a left-leaning or even centrist party. You have to be very vigilant and defend things like free speech. So the engaging in sort of cancel culture campaigns or metrics that the left decided it was going to do, in kind of the 2020s, let's say, I think that was always very dangerous fire to be playing with. It was probably always going to come back and bite them. So there's that aspect to it, but it's I think like the problem with it is the left has always championed free speech. Like you gave the example there of the ACLU defending the right of the Ku Klux Klan to have free speech. And of course, it's different in the UK. We actually do have anti-hate speech laws. Okay. You probably saw the story about Graham Linehan,
yes,
the comedy writer.
Covering it next month, yeah.
He was arrested for a couple of tweets that he sent. So in America, as I understand it, those tweets wouldn't have been actionable because he wasn't directly calling for violence. Whereas in Britain, the police escorted him out of the airport, packing guns. So we do actually have laws against hate speech. Arguably, the laws against hate speech have been over-interpreted in Britain in the last few years. Like many people have been arrested for tweeting the wrong thing. And the problem with that is that, if that's driven by a concern for social justice, a concern for oppressed minorities, then you might say it's a substantial good. But there's absolutely no reason that it won't be flipped on its head by a reform government in 2029. And suddenly, if you're posting anything left wing, you're going to have the cops at your door. And I think that's what we're seeing happening in the United States. So I would be like unsurprised if that was the situation in Britain in 4 or 5 years' time when we have a change of government. And it's all about like being asleep at the wheel on the left, I think. Like Keir Starmer, our current prime minister, came in with a massive majority. He came in promising change. Arguably, he's failed to deliver that. And one of the reasons he's failed to deliver that is that he's kind of echoed the messaging from the right. He's echoed their messaging on immigration. He's echoed their economic policies,
Yeah.
rather than taking the chance to tax and spend, to levy taxes on billionaires and corporations and invest that in infrastructure. And so that problem that I talked about earlier of, the collapse of Britain can easily kind of be pinned on him because he's the person in charge right now. And it continues to feed that sense of disaffection that can then be exploited by the far right. So I think, this is kind of creating a perfect storm whereby cancel culture could come back on the right in Britain in a big way. I don't think we're seeing it in the same way as we have in the reaction to Charlie Kirk's shooting. That's been a very rapid escalation of the far right's efforts to get rid of the left. But it's weird though, because like you say, we're kind of the similar ages. The reactionary right were the people who tried to cancel people for free speech in the 1980s,
Yes.
1970s, and further back. I mean, back when the right was more closely associated with both kind of Christianity and normie
The
society.
video nasties, brother.
Yeah, those were the same things. They were trying to ban video games. They were trying to ban horror films. So in a way, we've kind of come full circle, right? Like now it's the right that are cracking down on speech. What the left has to do then is return to a robust defense of free speech. The kind of disdain with which people talk about free speech bros. I mean, I think it's self-evident that, I think someone in the comments there mentioned that you could argue Charlie Kirk was himself a free speech bro. Now his death is being used to crack down on free speech. But one of the reasons that free speech bros on the right were able to gain such prominence is because the left abandoned that position in the main. So I think there's a real challenge there for the left to sort of re-engage with its free speech principles. And I'm not sure if I see a figure leading that charge.
Oof. Man, let me that was I agree wholeheartedly. I think there's people that have been talking about that for a long time. People like Adolf Reed have been writing and talking about that for a long time. He faced a certain amount of quote unquote cancellation from an essay he wrote a few years back. The lust to want to cancel people, to try to get people fired, is such I need to speak to your manager energy. And the left was filled with it. I would say in the 2010s, around the time of the Me Too movement, when you saw the kind of toppling of all these media figures. And that's really who benefited from that was people that worked in media. I don't think restaurant workers got it any easier during that moment. Back to you. In your book, The Darkest Timeline, you discuss the tech dystopia we're living through today in a recent Revol Substack article. You also wrote about the, quote, network state. Can you remind listeners what this is and explain how tech companies are trying to convince people it's the right way forward?
Absolutely. So the network state is something I find like really, really fascinating. It's I mean, in a way, that's one of the most fascinating aspects of the sort of fusion of these tech billionaires with the radical right in the US, is that kind of dystopia is exactly what cyberpunk imagined, right? Is that the billionaire class and the corporations and the authoritarians would all join up. And I think we're seeing that happen kind of in real time. So I think, what I argued in the book is like cyberpunk is now, like we are in the cyberpunk future. And I think that's only become more true since I published the book. The network state's an interesting sort of aspect of that. So you actually find an early version of it in Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash. Don't know if you've read that novel. Really brilliant, excellent kind of satirical cyberpunk novel. And in the world of Snow Crash, they're called burbclaves. And the idea is that it's a corporate-owned neighborhood. And the main character in the book, who's actually called Hero Protagonist, which is brilliant, he works delivering pizzas, and he has to kind of go between these burbclaves that are owned by different companies, including one that's like a pizza town owned by the mafia, who run all the pizza joints. So this was, a fairly comedy kind of concept that he'd brought into his cyberpunk world in the near future, but it was very much based on the kind of emergence of gated communities in the US. And I think there's like quite a substantial, I can't remember the exact percentage, but like an increasingly large percentage of Americans live in these gated communities. And in a gated community, you have, your own kind of ordinances in terms of what you can and can't plant on your front lawn, or what color your fence might have to be. You also have, private security employed to kind of police these closed communities. And very much like if you're not part of the community, you're kept out of it by a very large high gate. What's interesting about this, intersection of like Trumpism and Musk's world is that figures like Curtis Yarvin, who've advocated for network states, have started to really influence policy and discourse on the right. So I think like Balaji Srinivasan is the person who first wrote about the network state. And he is a big friend of Yarvin, and was a big influence on him. And the idea there is that it's I'll quote here from Srinivasan. He said it's a highly aligned online community with a capacity for collective action that crowdfunds territory around the world and eventually gains diplomatic recognition from pre-existing states. So what he's talking about there is taking like-minded communities of people online, funding a community in real life that's close to people who are outside it, and essentially setting it up as a state itself that has to be recognized in the same way that a country is now. And Yarvin's taken that idea and kind of run with it. Various figures, including Yarvin, have talked about how if we lived in a world of network states, if you weren't able to contribute economically or you didn't toe the party line, you could be ejected from the state. So you could effectively be made stateless or even made homeless for not following the corporate mantra of that particular enclave. And I think there's a lot of appetite, like figures like Yarvin, obviously, but also Peter Thiel has written in favor of network states. So it's kind of like a concept that's waiting in the wings, right? So what's the end game there? Does Trump believe that he can drive people into a situation where a network state sort of starts to break up the US? I don't think that's what's happening. But can you see aspects of the network state in the way that he's enshrined billionaires into policy and into strategy? I think you definitely can. And you could even argue that this Charlie Kirk stuff plays into the same thing. Like, that's the function of a network state, is that anybody who doesn't toe that corporate line, that party line, can be disenfranchised. And we're seeing it with the ICE raids as well. They're taking people out of America who have been here legally in some cases. They're dispossessing people, based purely on their economic status. They're stopping people in the street because of the color of their skin, the language they speak, or the jobs that they do. So these are all things that would happen in these theorized network states, right? So I think you can definitely see sort of the influence of that idea. It's not actually too different from a concept on the left as well. The temporary autonomous zone, which was initially proposed by Hakeem Bey. He proposed the setting up of, enclaves, which were, if not ideologically homogenous, then definitely, took part in shared resistance. His idea that these were kind of strategic, that they wouldn't necessarily be long lasting. So I think in a way the network state is like the imperial version of the TAS, right? The corpo imperial version. I actually just finished playing the game Cyberpunk 2077.
You finished it?
Yeah, what a game. By the time I tapped it out, I was really sad. But it very much has that idea embedded within it of like corporate controlled districts or cities. And if you're watching Alien Earth at the moment as well, that's very much the network state.
That's RoboCop.
Large.
I don't know the last time you've seen the RoboCop, the first 3 movies. We will ignore the remake as it.
Yeah. Oh God, the remake.
It's very different from the first 2, but in RoboCop, it's kind of about a corporation trying to make a city. They're privatizing the police force, and with each movie, they get further and further into making their own little, gated community, if you will.
Yeah.
But the city around it just gets worse and worse, which is kind of funny and doesn't make a lot of sense.
I mean, that
But
movie was so prophetic, right? So you've got Omnicorp who are trying to
Mhm.
sort of like leverage the idea of crime in an impoverished area to impose a corporation's values and rules on a whole city. And in Alien Earth, you see what that looks like after Omnicorp have succeeded. Like you have the Earth split into territories ruled by 5 different corporations. So this idea has been present in sci-fi for a long time. But RoboCop, I mean, hell, that was a prophetic movie. But you know, especially the first one with the little bites of TV stuff. I'd buy that for $1. All
well,
that stuff.
what's really I don't know when the last time you watched it was, but what really tripped me out and rewatching it maybe 2, 3 months ago was how happy the news hosts are, and they give you news in less than a minute.
Yep.
And there's like a coup happening in South Africa, and they're like, "There's another thing. 1 million people died today," and they're smiling as they say it. Then they pivoted to something that was kind of simple, and then it gets into the movie, and that's how the movie starts. So it's kind of setting you up for. We don't. I think they do tell you what year it is. I forget, but in this future, nothing matters.
Mm.
If people dying across the globe doesn't matter. Then you go to of course the Omnicorp scene where they're trying out Ed 209. The sales guy gets obliterated and no one cares. No one is shocked.
Yeah.
No one needs to take some time off work for this. It's like, okay, well, what else you got? What else you got?
I mean,
Um,
Verhoeven was just such a skilled satirist. I mean, all of his movies sort of have aspects of that, even things like Basic Instinct and Showgirls. But if you look at the kind of the fascist overtones of the society he depicts in Starship Troopers, like I
yes.
think that has a lot to say about Trump's America because, like you say, people there are happy, like they have internalized this idea that in order to be an upstanding member of society, you have to go and fight the other. You have to destroy the alien, right? I think like the phrase in the newscast is citizenship guarantees, no, service guarantees citizenship. So
Mhm.
it's this idea that you literally have to be conscripted into an army in order to have any democratic rights. And of course, you know, in terms of that kind of like false nostalgia that the right tends to dwell upon. They're looking back to an era where everybody had a manicured lawn and all the guys had a chiseled jaw and all the blondes were pneumatic blondes. And you know, I think Verhoeven really had his finger on the pulse in the 80s and 90s in terms of looking at what a more fascistic society would be like and what it would want and the kind of imagery it would produce. He was definitely ahead of his time there.
We are fans. Maybe we should watch a Verhoeven movie for a movie night.
Somebody just mentioned this in the comments. So Starship Troopers was very much a key influence on the game Helldivers 2. And Helldivers 2,
Oh, the game the kid
you,
played.
yeah, you basically like are in Starship Troopers fighting bugs or killer robots on another planet. But it's this kind of joyfully depicted fascist dystopia. And it's very, very interesting that that was the game referenced on the bullet engravings by the Charlie Kirk shooter. I think people are only just beginning to unpack what that means ideologically and how irony plays into it. You know,
I do have to ask you, we are going to stay on topic, I promise, but I do have to ask you. I'm sure you saw the text exchange between the shooter and their alleged roommate, lover,
I just
girlfriend.
read that actually before coming on the call. I was browsing
Oh,
through Substack and I can't remember who posted it. It was
were
maybe
you
Ken Evans.
cracking up? We're like, there's no way
It
two humans wrote this.
Yeah, I mean, it really did. I mean, first of all, it didn't sound like millennial speak, right? Like nobody communicates in sentences that long over text anymore. Not even old fucking dinosaurs like us. But it was the way in which he sort of like admitted to all of the aspects of the case that are already publicly known. Oh, I
Yeah,
wrapped the gun in a blanket and I left it on the left hand side of this specific tree. Yeah, it kind of screamed psyop to me. I don't want to be that
it
guy,
sounded
but
like the guy Ken Burns. We were joking about it last night on our sports show. Ken Burns that makes those documentaries about like the Civil War, like
Yeah.
my love, the battlefield was a blight on the. It's been a fortnight without you in my
Yeah.
heart.
No, I definitely don't think real people speak like that. Certainly not people who are into like furry fandom and Helldivers 2.
And making Pepe the Frog memes.
Yeah, that kind
Oh,
of dressing up like Pepe the Frog and then speaking like that on text doesn't
yeah,
seem that plausible.
it was like,
But also,
come on.
if you've got the shooter, why do you need to spread disinformation? The whole thing's this is kind of what Debord was writing about in Society of the Spectacle, and what Baudrillard was writing about in Simulacra and Simulation, right? Like
Mhm.
when you have psyop stuff, like copies of things, you actually can't tell what's real. So that text exchange could be real, but it exists in such a spectacular context that it could also be a fake. And even something real now looks like a fake because we live in a world of simulacra.
Oof. That's what's the crazy part about deep fake stuff. Like we're starting to see it more and more. And again, I don't know. I don't watch post game football matches. I try not to call it soccer. I want to call it by its real name. So we call it foot with the U. Um, but there's this new thing with AI where people are doing kind of deep fake post game conferences where it's the actual person, it's the actual post game conference, but they're actually saying like, "Oh, the team fucking sucked because this guy didn't, block this dude," and it's kind of funny. It's meant to be in jest, but I've seen people believe it's real.
Mm.
Uh, with the Charlie Kirk shooting, a friend sent me a video of it. He goes, "I think he's dead." This is before we knew what happened as far as his life, if he was alive or not, and I saw it and I was like, wow, that's heavy. And then a friend was asking me later, hey, I haven't seen it. Have you seen any footage? Like someone sent me footage, but I don't know if it's up. And I looked and it was like a few hours later and it was still up. So much gets taken down so quick when people die. But Charlie Kirk's shooting has stayed on these platforms for people to see because you have a man who, again, never campaigned for anything other than hate. Like, let's just be honest. All he
Mm.
said was the left is bad. Blacks are violent. Trans and gay people suck. It's really all he said, which is nothing you haven't heard before. He was just younger, but it's nothing you haven't heard before. And it's these comparisons to MLK, which you don't want to laugh. But I'm like, come on, man. You guys couldn't have found anyone else. Like,
Yeah.
He's a person that, at the end of the day, it's like, well, what did he do other than organize around outrage, which is pretty easy to do. But even in his organizing around outrage, what was the final outcome? Do you think that if Charlie Kirk never existed, Trump doesn't become president? I don't think he needs Charlie Kirk to become president. So honestly, this is a guy that was just a political entertainer like Rush Limbaugh, like, any other political entertainer we've had. And he's being made out to be some sort of odd martyr now.
Yeah, it's very strange, isn't it? He's been kind of canonized in reverse. I mean, gosh, I mean, I've never watched a Charlie Kirk stream, so maybe I'm like speaking outside of my area of expertise here. But it seems to me that he was like a debate me bro, right?
Yeah.
Like he kind of like gave the impression of being a free speech person by, Turning Point USA. They went around different campuses, and then he would invite left wing people to come on and debate him in front of a crowd, and he would score points over them in order to create these viral clips. Oh,
Mhm.
Charlie Kirk owns the libs on transgender rights or whatever it is. So I think you're right that he was part of like an ecosystem of spectacle, and maybe without that ecosystem, the conditions for Trump coming to power would have been more difficult. But ultimately, I think Trump is, a spokesman for corporate culture who masquerades as a man of the people. That's the great kayfabe trick that he has pulled off, is that the work is essentially like posing as a populist champion of ordinary people, But the
Yeah.
shoot that's really happening is that he's transferring enormous amounts of wealth to corporations and to billionaires, and ushering in a future where there's more control over what people say, think, do, where they work, who they can love. So it's kind of astounding that people don't have the critical tools to figure out what's going on there. But at the same time, the spectacular ecosystem, the media ecosystem around them, amplified by social media, has made that stuff much more difficult to see. And like you say, people want tickets to the clown show, right? So yeah, it's a difficult one, and I mean, you could say that there are figures on the left who sort of kind of do similar things to Charlie Kirk. I've read a few essays in the last week or so that people have tried to draw comparisons between him and Hassan Piker, for instance.
Yeah.
But I think in general, the left is trying to deconstruct what people like Charlie Kirk and the right, podcasters on the right are trying to do is largely about creating more of this kayfabe, more of this spectacle. So yeah, there's definitely a battle for the soul and the intellect of public life happening at the moment, and I think it's happening on both sides of the Atlantic.
It's weird because before this all happened, after the election, people felt that the election was lost because Kamala Harris couldn't really reach a certain person because she didn't go on Joe Rogan, she didn't go on Theo Vaughn, she did go on Shannon Sharp's show, but people don't care about black podcasts. Just be honest. Most watched interview in the history of YouTube, but everybody wants to point at Joe Rogan. But okay, she didn't go on those shows, and they said that she was out of touch. And there was a call for a left-wing Joe Rogan. If we just had a left-wing Joe Rogan, which I thought was funny because that's a creation, first of all, and second of all, then what? Like, I don't know what happens if you have a media figure, because if we think about liberal media kind of has dominated the culture space, and that's what the Charlie Kirks and Ben Shapiro's of the world, and even to a certain degree the Donald Trumps of the world, fight against, is Black Captain America and gay Superwoman and non-binary figures in shows, and Star Wars got woke because there's a black stormtrooper and you're ruining my all-white childhood. Like, this is what these people have been fighting against since they recast Kingpin in the first very not that good Daredevil movie like 20 years ago. So none of that stuff mattered because that was all happening before 2016. 2016 happens and Donald Trump gets in office. It looks like the culture war doesn't really matter when you're literally hunkering down and trying to win political battles like repealing abortion rights. That seems to be where the right has been very successful.
Yeah, they've got their eye on concrete goals, like you say, like getting rid of Roe v. Wade. But the way that they reach people and achieve that is through these kind of culture war battles. I mean, I don't know if it would have worked with Kamala going on Rogan, right? Like, everything Harris kind of brought to the table came through this like very curated, heavily scripted, very centrist. Like, it had all been filtered and written for her. Like, what people like about Trump, I think, is that he's off the cuff.
Yes.
Like, if you watch that episode that he did with Rogan, they talk politics, but it's incidental. He's kind of able to relate to Rogan as a normal guy. And that's the whole style of the Rogan show, right? Like, it kind of feels like you're sitting in a college dorm room and, some guy's talking some wild shit because he's smoked a joint and he's like, what a fucking aliens, bro. Like, Trump is able to fit into that style very, very easily because he is just basically a frat boy, who's become a billionaire.
Aspiring
Harris is
frat boy.
Yeah, Harris is a political creature. if you look at what Gavin Newsom's been doing on Twitter, or probably more accurately, what Gavin Newsom's interns have been doing on Twitter, they've been doing like the all caps tweets. They've been doing the culture war gotchas. They've been subtweeting people in a very kind of like Donald Trumpy right-wing podcastery way. So I think Newsom's trying to triangulate what would it look like if a kind of left-wing or centrist person did that like populist culture war stuff. I don't think it comes off that well. And that's maybe why it's going to be so difficult to like shake the dominance of the Trump machine. And similarly, you know, Reform and Farage on this side of the water, it's going to be difficult because all of the assumptions about what people want to hear from politicians on the left and in the center seem to be based on this notion of like civilized debate, well-developed policies. You know, people have been fed that stuff by both sides of the political spectrum for so long that anyone who's not feeding them that stuff is going to be perceived to be authentic. And yet, really, in order to affect change, you do have to have these clear policy goals. And in order to affect change, you do have to sort of be an incrementalist. Like that is the game, or has been the game for a very long time. So it's profoundly disturbing then when that tendency does install someone like Trump or does install someone like Farage, and suddenly they can do things like, you know, getting a talk show host fired like that, you know. Oof. So the territory has changed. Whether aping that kind of like populist, sensationalist right-wing mode is the right way to combat it, I don't know. I don't think anyone has figured out how you combat it yet on the field of culture or at the ballot box. It would be good to see that emerge. I think, you know, if you look at someone like Bernie Sanders, he does speak in an authentic way. Like if you watch the recent Rogan episode with Sanders, he's amazing at steering Rogan back from the craziness. And, you know, the way he does that is very basic politics. He tries to build consensus. He says, well, would you agree with this one minor point? And would you agree with that second supplementary point and this third point? Okay, then you and I actually agree on what we should do about universal health care, for instance. So, you know, there are politicians who are natural at this, who speak like normal people. I think like, that's great. Sorry, it's just been shown a message there from my special advisor. Yes, we have to cut the show short now.
Oh no!
No, we don't. I'm just kidding. But no, yeah. What was I saying? Yeah, there are people who are able to speak like normal people, sort of in the way that Trump does, but don't have a malign agenda. Sanders is one of those people. I think Jeremy Corbyn in the UK is one of those people. Unfortunately, those people get betrayed, stabbed in the back, and undermined by politicians of the left, liberal, center who still believe in that old model of like, you know, very curated, PR'd speeches on talking points, and also whose version of incrementalism in terms of policy is all about capitulating to the market. Mm-hmm. You know, both Corbyn and Sanders were a big threat to the market. They were a big threat to like the established order. That's why Corbyn was, you know, smeared as an anti-Semite. That's why, you know, the nomination was taken away from Sanders. And I think that also accounts a little bit for the rightward drift, is that if you see somebody who speaks like a normal person and who's popular and has like a growing movement, and then that person has the legs kicked out from under them, then why wouldn't you think we're going to have to go to the populist, you know? So these things are connected. I think there is a way of engaging people that counteracts the type of populism that Trump channels, but we need to be more willing to let those people cook. You know what I mean?
I think we're seeing, right, because here in the States, after Sanders, you get the rise of people like AOC, which, you know, is a bad word in certain left circles, but I believe her and Sanders have finally called what's going on in Gaza genocide, which still hasn't silenced some of their critics. That, you know, people forget you can be a critic when you have no political allegiance. I can say whatever I want about any politician because I have no political allegiance. I don't have to get any policy passed. I can just call everybody a piece of shit, and no one's going to be good enough. It's one of the benefits of being able to throw a Molotov in a crowded room. Malcolm X was real good at that. Always shit on the civil rights movement earlier in his life. So I do think what we're seeing in New York with Zoran Mondami is interesting and hopeful.
Yep.
Because he seems to be of the Sanders-ish mold, right? Like, I'm going to actually campaign on things and not just be not that guy before me, which would be easy to do because Eric Adams was not beloved by people of New York. It'd probably be one of the more forgettable mayors of that city's time. But if Mondami can pull off a victory, you would hope that the Democratic Party, which I don't think they care on the national scale, would see the path forward is.
That would be my question for you. Like, do you think the types of policies that Mondani is advocating for, do you think they scale, or do you think they can scale? I kind of think that if you try to scale them, like that guy would probably be the next guy getting shot.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think it's going to be very difficult to get anything done to scale. Let's see what happens on the New York stage, and let's see if there can be a Republican that can do what Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump did. People forget that Ronald Reagan also really turned the Republican Party around. It made it even more conservative. Donald Trump has been able to really shock the old GOP to the point where there's still people in the party that don't like him. Charlie Kirk was a never Trumper.
I mean, Vance said he was America's Hitler, right?
So these turns are easy. Let's see what happens. There's always, that'll never happen. Well, I don't know what's never going to happen. I don't have that level of clairvoyance. I do kind of want to go back to your writing, though. Recently on Fox News, Brian Kilmeade and another host suggested lethally injecting drug-addicted homeless people because they are a blight in society. How do you see the rise of the network state and gated communities shaping public acceptance of the idea that euthanizing the poor is a legitimate way to manage poverty?
I mean, there's so many things about that are fucking insane. I mean, first of all, there's a huge demographic crisis looming in Western countries. Right?
Mm-hmm.
We shouldn't be killing off anybody. Like we kind of need everyone. There's going to be an incredible amount of people who need elderly care already. I mean, this is one of the points where the rights argument about immigration breaks down in the UK, is that the health service, the schools, like so much infrastructure completely runs on immigrant labor. But the idea of like euthanizing the undesirables, the useless eaters, this is something that's existed for a very long time. Also, you've got to remember that like eugenics itself was a position that was definitely not just found on the right in the pre-war period. I mean, eugenics after World War II definitely took a hit in terms of people that would support it. But the idea that, the disabled, the indigent, the homosexual was in some way like pulling society down and couldn't be sustained, that they were useless eaters. That was something that lots of left-wing intellectuals proposed as well. So I don't think it's a new thing necessarily. What's useful, how it connects to the network state, is that the network state is a framework for excluding those people up to the point of killing them. A network state is a corpo state. That means that everybody within it has got to be productive and has got to toe the party line. So written into the very constitution of the idea of a network state is the idea that you wouldn't have any homeless people because they would be made stateless and kicked out of the country. And that's not too dissimilar to like 2000 AD Judge Dredd, right? So in Judge Dredd, you have the mega cities, and then outside you have the wasteland. And that's like the worst thing that can happen, other than being killed by a judge, is that you get ejected and kicked out into the wasteland with the other mutants. So that's kind of, I think, what Kilmeade is talking about here. He's talking about people who can't be supported by society, and therefore should be able to be disposed of by other means. But that's the old lie. Like, we need everybody. We need absolutely everybody. It's very easy to say somebody's a blight on society. Um, I mean, if you look at, I can't remember the name of the guy. He was exonerated from killing a guy on a public subway uh, who was a mentally ill person who'd assaulted
Jordan
another
Neely
customer.
was the man that
Thank you.
died. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, obviously on the right, the talking point was that this homeless guy was like a blight on society.
Yeah.
The other way of framing that is that if there was an infrastructure in place in America that enabled that person to get help, they could easily have gone back to being a productive member of society, or at least not a danger to other people. I think you can almost say this about, the people who are doing political violence, who are doing targeted assassinations or school shootings or mass shootings of any kind. These are people who society has failed to help. Like, we're in a
Mhm.
massive crisis when it comes to mental health. How that plays out in America is, at some point they decided that the sort of mental institutions should be shut down because they weren't taking care of people. And as I understand it, there was supposed to be money in place to set up local outreach centers to support people with mental health, and that money was never spent on that, right?
Mhm.
And that's why the streets were flooded with people with drug problems, mental health problems. Similarly, in the UK, the notion of care in the community was supposed to be about supporting people in their home environments. It's been an excuse to sort of not treat people unless they're in dire crisis. And by the point someone's in crisis, it's already too late. The brother of the Southport killer. I don't know if you remember that story from I think last year in the UK.
Where the kid stabbed the poor girl.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that kid had serious mental health problems.
Yeah.
He'd expressed violent thoughts to enough people that he'd been referred to the Prevent Anti-Terrorism group 3 times, I think. Um, there was no framework for helping this kid who was probably, either psychotic or had paranoid delusions or was maybe schizophrenic. There was no infrastructure to help this kid until it was already too late. And speaking as somebody who's had issues with mental health myself, like, I'm diagnosed bipolar. I'm lucky enough to be quite privileged. I have a family who support me. I have a wife who supports me. I have a network of friends I can rely on. My illness isn't so severe that I can't sustain a job, like hold down a career, pay my bills. If I was less privileged than that, there are various points at which I would have fallen through the gaps.
Yeah.
And seeking treatment when you are on the way down, is almost impossible. And the treatment that you do get when you're in crisis is incredibly time limited. They basically want to get you out of crisis and back into the capitalist machine. Like, if you can stand and go to work, then you don't need help.
Yeah.
That's to do with there not being the infrastructure to sort of intervene and support people before they reach crisis. Um, there's all sorts of aspects to this as well. I mean, there's an anti-carceral movement that says that you should never ever for any reason lock someone up for their own good. I'm in total disagreement with that as somebody who's been through a manic crisis myself before. I've never been institutionalized, but I can very much see the need to be institutionalized. I mean, gosh, I'm going into the weeds
But
with this
it's
one,
it's
but
all. I think it also boils down to what do you want the institution to look like, right? Like
mm,
I think there's a yin and yang moment that we have here with what you're talking about. You have Jordan Neely on one end, where he was killed by a person on a train, and you have the other side, which is a man that you could say is very Jordan Neely-esque, killed a woman on a train for no reason. He was
mm,
having mental health crisis. His family had tried to get him committed. He was in and out of facilities. He had just been in a facility. His family had just warned police. The police were like, nothing we can do about it. He hasn't done anything, and he killed someone. Um, this, to me, I think speaks to what you're talking about when you have this kind of anti-carceral thought, like we don't call the law enforcement for anything, or we need a special kind of magic law enforcement that knows the magic words. Like Mary Poppins comes in and she just gives them a spoonful of sugar and then they calm down. As someone that's worked with very mentally ill people that are unhoused, that do get super violent, it's harder than one thinks,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a job that most people don't want. But I'm a believer, and everyone on our show, there's a few things that we all believe. If you are a part of this show, which is we don't throw people away on the left.
Yeah. I think that's what I'm trying to say here is like this guy, Brian Killamall or whatever he's called. Like you can't kill people who fall through the cracks. Do you know what I mean? You can't take away all of the support that we have for unwell people or people in crisis, and then when they fall through the cracks, like then kill them. Like you just can't do that. So I think we, again, this is something which in the center and on the left we have to come to reckon with again, is the level of support that people need.
Yes.
And there's a resistance to that because once somebody crosses a line and does something that's so horrific, like that murder on the bus that you're describing, like we tend to then cross over into calling them monsters. The question should be not are they evil, are they monsters, but how do you stop people from falling through the cracks to the extent that those actions take place? I mean, one that I always refer to, Freddie DeBoer talks about this a lot as well, is Kanye West. People say, well, bipolar doesn't make you racist. I mean, if anyone's ever been on a locked ward, you will hear a lot of racist, anti-Semitic, misogynist, horrible language, because when your brain is malfunctioning, sometimes that's what comes out or is uncovered. I mean, I had an elderly relative who became started to lose her marbles as she got older. She became racist. Right now, maybe there was racism underneath all the time, and what happened was the mask that enabled her to not be racist suddenly couldn't be sustained because of the Alzheimer's. I don't know, but the point is that often when you cross into being unwell, you're also then espousing ideas or opinions or viewpoints that are unacceptable. But people say, oh, mental illness doesn't cause racism. I'm sorry, but in the fact of Kanye, like he is a classic bipolar person not taking his meds. The releasing the song called Heil Hitler. I mean, this is just classic bipolar behavior. So we need to make sure that we can treat people and not demonize them. And if we let things get so bad that they are, sleeping on the streets, walking around mumbling, reaching into their pants for a handful of shit, we can demonize those people just as easily as we demonize somebody who stabs a bunch of school children. And we demonize people all the time. We other them. So that's basically the sharp end of what this Kilmeade character is saying, is that if you don't fit into productive society and you're unwell, or if even just circumstances have caused you to become poor and unhoused, that you in some way become a useless eater. But this is something, the character that he's talking about killing is something that the society he advocates for has created.
They missed that part. They missed that part, and I just recently wrote. Well, I wrote about it in February, actually, and I put it up on the Substack. It's definitely there from the Crisis Papers, but I think that's the future. We're seeing it already in other countries, especially Canada. They're really quick to give you the euthanization. Was it called MAID?
Yeah.
So I do believe, and when Kilmeade said it, I was shocked because in my estimation, I thought we were at least 20 years out. And to hear people say that so quickly, especially right now, in the last 10 years has been this kind of whirlwind of what the F. I'm kind of like, do we see state by state in the US trying to, because the first thing you're going to say is drug addiction is a health condition, and this health condition can't be cured. We've tried everything. if you want this way out, you can get it, and we'll try to make it as advantageous for you as possible. So it's a frightening reality.
I can't remember what country she was from. It might have been the Netherlands, but there was somebody who'd had extremely severe depression for her whole life, and I think she was the first person granted permission to end her life through a suicide clinic because of a mental health condition, not a physical health condition. They're about to bring in that rule in the UK. We're going to have euthanasia clinics potentially in the next 5 years, but the rules around it are quite strict. The rules are that you have to already have a terminal illness, and I think that in most of the places where it exists, those are the rules. There is the risk of creep, right? And that creep sort of comes from both sides. It comes from like
Yes.
a compassionate liberal stance where you're saying that people shouldn't be in pain, they should have the right to free choice over what happens with their lives. But on the other side of that is like capitalist free choice, like the suicide booths in Futurama, just being able to kind of choose one day, okay, that's enough. I can't take capitalism anymore. So my choice under capitalism is to pay for the suicide booth.
Or it's like, hey, come to the suicide booth, and whoever brings you, will give them $500 on their next blood transfusion.
Yeah.
Or plasma donation.
But what do we do with useless people, right? Like how do we deal with
harvest
people
their
who
organs
are a burden on society? I think the first step is to have a society which does have infrastructure. Maybe there'd be fewer of them that way. I know this is like difficult for sort of neoliberal center to get its head around, but you have to invest in infrastructure. If communities don't have hospitals, if communities don't have GPs, if communities don't have, even just like public amenities, like places to work out, restaurants to eat in, if you don't have all of that stuff, which capitalism, by the way, is meant to generate and support and fund, you don't have all that stuff, guess what? People are going to turn on each other, or they're going to fall through the cracks. So that's, I think, what we're facing here, that in terms of how the far right has risen so far in both of our countries, is chronic underinvestment in society itself. And that's neoliberalism is at the heart of that. Neoliberalism was a machine for extracting wealth from the general population and lining the pockets of shareholders, and that's still going on. I mean, I think if I could like choose, like Brian Kilmeade wants to kill one class of society as a whole, just get rid of some undesirables, where I would start would be shareholders, right? Like what happens when a company is struggling? They talk about like, oh, maybe we'll take it into public ownership. But we can't take it into public ownership because we'd have to compensate all the shareholders. If you're talking about something that's critical infrastructure, like a water company, like somebody who takes care of the sewers and processes waste, why would you compensate those shareholders if you were trying to take it into public ownership to fix it? Like, those shareholders should never have had a share of something that's to do with like a country's infrastructure in the first place. If you watch the latest Adam Curtis film, it was about Britain in the 1980s, and someone just mentioned Thatcherism there. Like she presided over that first wave of privatizing public infrastructure, and even in the very, very early days of that, you saw that what happened when it goes into private hands is like chronic underinvestment in maintaining it, dangerous experimentation with new approaches that causes people to get poisoned, like whole communities being poisoned. That happened from day one of the march to privatization, So yeah, shareholders, the idea that if you hold a share in a company and it's going down the tubes, you should in some way be compensated if that company runs a crucial part of public infrastructure is absolutely ludicrous. What's happened with particularly the water companies in Britain is that they've been borrowing money to inflate the size of the company and then paying that out to shareholders. So I think that's, again, an opportunity for the left, or an opportunity for a serious politician who's willing to challenge the establishment. That's the opportunity there, is you actually talk about the way in which money's been shifted into the pockets of corporations and shareholders. It's not just about billionaires, it's about everyone who invests in their companies too. And you can make a strong argument that the internet is public infrastructure. That argument was made early on in the kind of optimistic early days of the internet. The internet utopians would argue that, you know, it was a form of public good to have the internet. So these are the kind of industries that, like, if I was running for office, I'd be looking to nationalize those kinds of industries and bring them in line with the concept of like building community for people. That's why people turn to the right or to the far right, is because of their communities being underinvested, because of their society collapsing around them. And that's how you get to apocalyptic ideas like, you know, killing all the homeless people.
You recently wrote an article about protest in the Revol Press Substack. You wrote that the discourse today is that these protests, despite the fact that they have successfully changed nothing, must be legislated against more harshly. Yet when we accept, even subconsciously, that protest is ineffective and merely there to salve our consciousnesses and drain us of our righteous fury, then it is more and not less likely that the government will curtail our right to participate. Why are we seeing this level of censorship when, as you say, protest alone does little in the way of systemic change? Can you talk to us a little bit about your most recent piece?
Yeah, no problem. I mean, so I based, like, this piece was a little bit more autobiographical than stuff I've written before.
It's very moving.
Oh, thank you. That's nice to hear.
I wanted to meet your sister after I read it and give her a hug, make sure she's okay.
Yeah, she's good. She's good. I remember very vividly seeing my sister going off to protest against the poll tax. The poll tax is, you know, a charge that was supposed to be levied across society at the same rate. It was like a property tax, basically. And again, it kind of chimed with those Thatcherite values of like, everybody gets treated the same and you keep what you earn, right? The problem being that if you had a multi-million-pound mansion, you'd be paying the same poll tax as somebody who's in a council flat. So the resistance against it was very popular. It was perceived as unfair by, you know, the vast majority of people in Britain, I think. Also, the resistance to it kind of coordinated at a community by community level, built this like really broad-based coalition of resistance. When the big protest happened in Trafalgar Square in London, they sent riot police in, and they sent riot police into a crowd that was mostly peaceful protesters. You know, mums pushing children in buggies were there protesting alongside, you know, anarchists and socialists and trade union members. They treated this with a really harsh level of violence, and yet it had broad kind of populist support, much more than the support that was given to the miners who were striking, you know, a few years earlier than that. Did that protest achieve its aims? I mean, first of all, people were very, very shocked by the way that demonstration was violently shut down. So I think in a certain sense, it did change the conversation about the poll tax. They eventually settled on a thing called the council tax, which was like a diluted version of that, where they value your house based on the size of it, and then you pay a charge according to that. But it's, you know, it still definitely did punish poor and lower middle class people. So far from a perfect solution. It's not like the demonstration achieved its aims, but it definitely did influence public discourse. Then when I was growing up, we had like the largest marches ever against the Iraq War. Mm-hmm. And these were completely ignored, right? So public opinion was massively against the Iraq War. There was, I think, like quite a lot of public knowledge that the information that we were being given about why we were going into this war was probably false. Mm-hmm. And none of that made a difference. They actually didn't police those demonstrations too hard. They didn't send in the riot cops. They let everybody turn up, you know, with their banners, pushing their kids in buggies, you know, everyone brightly colored, saying "Give peace a chance." They knew that they could effectively ignore those demonstrations, and so the demonstrations sort of really act as like a pressure release valve for that political feeling rather than it being allowed to influence public policy. They just went their own way and invaded Iraq anyway. I feel like something similar is happening with the pro-Palestinian protests. They have aggressively policed those in some instances. I think there were like hundreds of people arrested recently for supporting Palestine Action, who they prescribed as a terrorist group. And the people that they were arresting were just like ordinary people who opposed the genocide. They were absolutely ordinary people. These were not like radicals in any sense. Just like the people protesting against the poll tax, these were ordinary people who saw something unfair and want to speak out against it. Not just something unfair, but something genuinely horrific unfolding. So, you know, obviously they felt strongly enough about it that they were going to arrest hundreds of people and throw them in jail for wearing a t-shirt or holding a placard. If you see, you know, if you directly compare that to the Tommy Robinson march that happened last week, there were very few arrests, you know, despite there being like quite a lot of public affray. A lot of police officers were hospitalized. There was a lot of public vandalism. Public urination is now like a topic in the British discourse because of that march, because it was mostly men and they were kind of peeing wherever they wanted. So it's just an interesting contrast, isn't it? That like they've jailed a lot of the pro-Palestine protesters, but it hasn't stopped us selling arms to Israel. It hasn't really affected the way that the UK government talks about the war over there. Whereas when the right wing have protested, you know, this protest last weekend was the culmination of a lot of right wing messaging that the Labour Party sort of parroted, or at least given a kind of more, at least acknowledged that these talking points have some validity, you know. So I think there's like two things going on there. You know, one is the fact that if you fear that a demonstration is going to be effective or get near achieving its aims, if it's attracting a lot of public support, you can crush that with, you know, you could crush that dissent with the arm of the state. But when you sense a sort of cultural tide rising, you can also sort of just try and address its aims, you know? So I think like what I was trying to say with that essay is that just protesting, just being at the biggest march in history, just holding a placard, just being there and experiencing the joy that comes of resistance isn't necessarily going to achieve anything. You know, if you think back to protests like the Stonewall riot, for instance, that probably had more, it probably shifted the dial or the needle a lot more, despite being a very, very small scale protest. So I think for me, it's about thinking about like what the concrete aims of protests are, what the methods of engagement are, how to sort of force the hand of the state so that being on a 100,000 strong march actually can effectively drive policy changes or different approaches. I think we need to do a lot of thinking about the role of protest at the moment and how we go about it, because it's very easy to attend the largest march. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to have any effect on where the needle sits on a particular issue.
Well, we're coming up on an hour and a half. His name is Bram Gieben. He is a partner in Revol Press. Wherever you are watching or listening to the show later, there's a link in the description to get Bram's book and all the books on Revol Press. Follow them on their Substack as well. Bram, is there anything you're working on that you want to shout out, or any books that are coming out anytime soon?
My next book for Revol is probably not going to drop till 2027, but I've been reading a lot of Philip K. Dick for that one. That's all I'll say about that so far. But I will be launching a new essay series on my Substack soon. I'm going to be engaging with the topic of the manosphere. I'm really hoping to get a lot of eyeballs on that and a lot of discussion, because it's me sharing a book that's a work in progress with the hope of driving a lot of conversation. Like the essay I just published, it's a lot more personal. I talk a lot more about my own experience of growing up as a man in society as it is just now and has been in the last 20, 30 years. So that's called Crisis Masculinity, and that's coming soon on my Substack, which is strangeexiles.substack.com. So yeah, maybe some people will come and join me there for some of those essays.
We'll have to bring you on for that. We'll bring Pascal on for that one as well. I'm sure he'll have a lot of things to say. Bram, thank you very much, and have a very good rest of your evening.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Jason.
All right. Peace, brother. Love having Bram on the show. Love being a kind of peripheral part of Revol, I guess, as a contributor. Excited for you guys to read what me and Ben will be working on when he gets back. I will be back later this evening for those watching this show on YouTube at the same bat time on the same bat channel. I will be joined with Pascal and MT, where we'll be talking to Vivek Chibber about the PMC. So definitely stay tuned for that. And after the show, I'll be going into the champagne room. We're going to have a movie night watch party. So there's just a lot going on this very happening Thursday, the 18th. Now, I am going to try to go back to sleep because it's early. So thank you guys, and we are out.